HIVE is the first archive for contemporary art performing arts, and the title of the project is HIVE. Very simple. It's a project that is composed of two units: an ARC, as we describe it, that is building collections of contemporary art performing arts in the fields of dance, theater, and music from a region that is over 20 countries. And the second part is the HIVE, which aims at generating new work, commissioning texts, researchers, working on translations or partnerships with university departments, research institutes, individuals, and other. Before I continue speaking about HIVE, I thought the best way to give a bit of context about why this project is happening now, even though it is a project that took 7 years for us to bring to life. When Haraka started in 2006, the first thing that I thought is important as a contribution to the local scene in Egypt and in the Arabic-speaking region would be an anthology or an archive of some sort. And it took 7 years, more or less, for this project to come together because of how problematic it is to deal with memory and to deal with archival practices in the Arabic-speaking region. There is a video that I would like to show. I'm still learning how to use an extended screen. But there is a video that I would like to show that was shot by Noura Farhat, who is a video artist and one of the visual researchers working with us in HIVE. And it was shot on the 17th of December 2011 in Cairo, nearby a building called l'Institut d'Égypte. The video is not directly related to HIVE. It was not commissioned by Haraka, and this was the first time Noura took her camera down to the streets during the first year of the Egyptian revolution.
مكتوب عليه 1800
من ده كتاب حضرتك. هم من فوق العماير كانوا بيزقلوا بالطوب، ففي طوبه جت عندي فرايح جنب الحيطه فاستخبى من الطوب، فلقيت كرتونه كامله اترمت على الارض من ضمنها الكتاب ده. واللي مش عارف قيمه الكتاب ده خده. ناس كتيره مش عارفه قيمه الكتب دي خدتها.
شوف هم فوق هنا.
طبعا انا عايز افضفض، انا تعبان يعني. حرام المجلس الاعلى للقوات المسلحه يبعت فرقه المظلات تنزل عبر عن طيارات الهليكوبتر تنقذ التراث بتاع مصر. هم لو عايزين ينقذوا التراث بتاع مصر هينقذوه. هم لو عايزين يحموا التراث بتاعنا هيحموه. يحموا من الجهل، يحمونا من المندسين، يحموا من الناس اللي بتحرق، الناس اللي بتخرب، والناس اللي هي بتحدف الكراتين دي لصالح مين؟ الناس دي لصالح مين اللي بيحدفوا الكراتين؟ كراتين تراث مصر بترمي على الارض.
So as I said, I'm still trying to learn how to use an extended screen. But the building that we saw in this video is l'Institut d'Égypte, which is the oldest science society outside of Europe. It was built in the 1700s. This was the 17th of December 2011 when the building was set on fire with all the books that are there. So a collection over 300,000 books, and not just books, manuscripts, objects, icons. It's basically a treasure house that was set on fire, completely destroyed except for a few books that we tried to save. L'Institut d'Égypte, when it was first opened, the president was Gaspard Monge, who's the founder of what we know now as technical drawing. The vice president was Napoleon Bonaparte. The head of the cultural and artistic section was Denon, who later became the first president, the first director of Le Musée du Louvre. So this is the kind of institution that we're speaking about, but this is not the first time that this happens generally, and certainly not the first time that this happens in Egypt. The Cairo Opera House, as an example, just a second. The Cairo Opera House that was built in 1869 was set on fire in 1971, even though it is on the same square opposite to the headquarters of the firefighters. The National Theatre of Egypt, that was built also in the 1800s, was set on fire in 2008 and burned down, even though it is also on the same square that is opposite to the fire headquarters. So many theaters have witnessed the same, and so many archives, and one remembers stories over the past centuries that are all the way from the Baghdad library until contemporary times, right after the Tunisian Revolution began with the attack on contemporary artists during an exhibition in Tunis. Why is archive happening now? Because when one is witnessing the burning down of historical edifices and documents such as this, one knows how political memory is and how things are going to disappear at the speed of light. Archive is aiming at collecting material as well as generating context, because the context of the Arabic-speaking region is a very specific context, even though one at a first glance would think that it is divided to contemporary and traditional artistic practices. It is actually divided to independent, or so-called independent, and state-run. Somewhere around the 1950s, during the Arabist nationalist project that was headed by the President Nasser, after monarchies have changed to republics, including Egypt turning from monarchy to republic, a project of nationalization of everything, including the cultural life, began. Egypt, being a country that is extremely influential in the field of politics and culture in the Arabic-speaking region, started becoming a model, and cultural edifices in the region started modeling themselves after the Ministry of Culture and the Egyptian Conservatoire for Music and the Arts, and so on. And all these models were very much influenced by the ex-Soviet Union cultural establishments and edifices. Once this ends, a police state begins, and a police state that is very much present to the extent that our national archives, which hosts, again, very important documents about the history of Egypt, as well as our contemporary cultural practices, has a police unit in it, and one cannot get to see any document in the National Archives without a police authorization or actually working for them or working for the government. On this day that Noura was filming, I was there on the streets at the same time with a group of friends and scholars and researchers, and we realized that we have to work on pushing the project of archive forward, because contemporary artistic practices in the fields of performing arts have always happened outside of the doors and the walls of the Ministry of Culture or the state in general, and this is not just in Egypt, this is in the whole of the Arabic-speaking region. Before I continue speaking a bit more about archive, I would like to introduce my guests, and I would like to do this also as an example of what kind of partnerships that the project is currently investigating and developing in order for this project to happen. I would like to start by speaking with Mr. Thomas Thorhausch, who is the Assistant Director to the Dance Archives in Köln, whom we met in Cairo more than once during several work engagements with his institution and with Haraka. And I would like you please to speak a little bit to us about what kind of partnership we're developing now in relation to your institution.
Okay, I'm sitting here not only representing the largest dance archive in Germany, the Deutsches Tanzarchiv Köln, but also the rich tradition of preserving dance and its history for future generations. And to me personally, as well for the German Dance Archive, this is of course a matter of, well, political solidarity, of course. But on the other hand, we're supporting this initiative because it combines for me in an ideal way the preservation of a national heritage on dance, on art, but also the intention of integrating this knowledge into the contemporary discourse on dance and art. And how to say, we're really proud in being part of this concept of a network storage. You can tell more about it, in order to keep this legacy alive for future generations. Personally, I'm deeply moved of the vision of exchange of ideas and methods on archiving and, well, the discussion of dance, of course. So.
when we first met in 2007, it was in Cairo, working on a research and presentations project that was very brief. It was called Dance and the Visual, and it was basically shared questions from both sides on what it is to actually document or capture the moving or the performing body on an image-based medium, and how do we present this. And our first encounter was deeply immersed in this question of what it is to archive, but there it was more from a philosophical question. What are we left with? What are we presenting? What does the audience get from a recorded presentation? And from here, I would like to go to Maika Bleeker, who is, together with the project GPS, that she will also explain briefly, is a partner in HIVE, where we are raising so many questions that deal with different kinds of partnerships, such as working with university departments and dealing with curricula, as well as dealing with these theoretical questions that we have raised back in 2007 about what it is to digitize the performing body and how do we deal with this digital document. Dr. Maika Bleeker, please.
Yeah, I'm also really happy to be involved in this developing partnership, and especially also from this project GPS. This is a project that is currently being developed from an organization that I represent, and that is called Performance Studies International, or PSI. And we are much invested at the moment in developing concrete projects to diversify the understanding of performance and performance studies, the study of performance in the broadest sense of the word, so definitely including dance to a large extent. And this project aims to kind of open up how we think about studying performing arts, and not only to study a diversity of performing arts from different places, but also to study it in ways that are informed by different places, so different perspectives on what it means to study performing arts. And GPS stands for Global Performance Studies, but also for an approach to performance studies that is not focusing on one center or emerging from one center, but is thought in terms of a constant, positioning oneself that can happen in relation to different places in relation to one another. And we're really happy we're setting up this project under the umbrella of PSI, but with a whole network of universities that is growing also. And we're very happy to be involved now in this project here also, because it is an amazing way of developing as a kind of our first concrete example, how rethinking what we're doing when we teach and when we study performance, how that can be done through a network and through partnerships in different places in the world. So what we will be involved in is kind of related to the archiving itself. We will develop modes of working with the archival material and reflection on how to relate to this material and how that might inform our understanding of how to teach and research performance. So, and we're very excited in doing that in dialogue with Archive.
The archive, just to briefly explain also, it is going to be based on 3 locations. The first is in the Middle East, and this is going to be in Cairo. The second is in Köln, at the Dance Archives in Köln. And the third is at the Lincoln Center's New York Public Library for Performing Arts. It's a pity that we don't have our partner from New York, Jacqueline Davis, with us, but she's been in meetings here with us over the past 3 days discussing all these partnerships and how do they come together into one shared vector towards continuing our growing partnership for the archive project. But from here, I would like to actually invite my colleague from Cairo, Ismail Fayed, who is a critic and a dramaturg, has been working with us on archive as well, to together with Professor Dr. Ramzi Barrett have a conversation about the shared concerns, whether philosophically or even just dealing with art history, because even though this is a very specific project happening within a very particular context, there are shared questions that go over and beyond this project. So, if you...
Thank you. I think that Dr. Ramzi has raised many questions about history of dance. whether in the UK or in the European context in general. And I think it's very interesting to excavate and maybe question the idea of histories, plural, of how certain practices develop and how they can sometimes mirror each other and how sometimes they can go in different ways. And maybe it would be interesting if you briefly give an example in the British context, you know, and how it varies or converges or diverges from the European context as a whole.
I should say I met Adham before, and we had conversations, and then I also met up with Ismail in London and had some conversations, particularly around this issues of histories. And one of the things that we talked about was modernities and how the relationship between modernities and modernism in an aesthetic context, and how in many ways Europe, and perhaps even more so Western Europe and North America, have tended to own modernity and exclude other places around the Mediterranean from sub-Saharan Africa and other parts of the world from the discourse of modernism, and that somehow it seemed important to me, and what I welcome the opportunity to find out more about how kind of modernist sort of dance practices have developed in Egypt and the other Arab countries, as a way of decentering, to help me decenter my own kind of Eurocentric views. But we were talking about, one of the things we talked about is we were finding just similarities. One project that I'm doing currently is related to British dance and the African diaspora, and finding, well, in Britain there are some black British dancers using African people's dance forms. There are a lot of others using contemporary Graham-based contemporary dance for their choreography, and how there seemed to be a curious changeover that Graham technique arrives in Britain in the mid-60s. By the mid-70s it's being given up, and by the late 70s and early 80s there are black British dance companies working with Graham and still working with Graham. And so why is this? And I mentioned this, and we had this interesting stories about the arrival of the Graham technique via Poland, in Egypt.
Yes, we were actually discussing how certain practices are introduced in different contexts, and you mentioned that Graham was introduced in the 60s in the UK context, and Adham has explained that Egypt was aligned towards the left, more socialist, more Soviet political and economic model. And a lot of how institutions were affiliated with each other in this period was with Eastern Europe and the ex-Soviet Union. And therefore, a lot of exchange of ideas and practices was with the Eastern European bloc. So you have Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and many of what we consider in Egypt as contemporary theater practices or dance practices were introduced by Polish companies or Czech or Yugoslavian or Russian. And I think it's very interesting to see how Egyptian historians of theater and dance think of contemporary theater or dance as something that started and ended by 1970. So after that, there seems to be a void. Before that, there seems to be a belief that whatever was produced was contemporary to Egypt. So yeah. I think that then the notion of how certain contexts perceive history and time is very revealing, and contrast and compare.
What's interesting in, just looking at history from where we are based, from where the project is based in Cairo, but more generally in the Arabic-speaking region, is that this is a region where its history has been written and rewritten so many times, almost every 50 years or 40 years. We were trying to calculate the other day how many times has it been rewritten, whether by changing the official name of the country or by changing the flag, changing the lingua franca more than once, the official religion, even the name of the country itself, but even deeper than this, by changing facts. So until the early, from the 40s to the 50s, for instance, Egypt was understood and was seen as, and mainly Cairo and Alexandria as cities, but the rest of the country as the cosmopolitan cities of the Mediterranean, where culture is everybody's right. It was not owned by the state, it was only owned by the people. And everything was run through the civic society. Later, in the late 50s, everything was a different story once the nationalization project began. And the same with the constitution, how in 1923 in Egypt, the constitution was basically allowing any religious practice in any architectural form with any language of your choice. This was literally an article in it, when later then the constitution at such times becomes very tight, to the extent that last week, just before I traveled here to Düsseldorf, there was a meeting at the second parliament, the Majlis al-Shura, where they were discussing banning classical ballet because it is not constitutional. And by this, it means closing the Ballet Institute and closing down the ballet company. What I would also like to say is that it's not always that it happens in ways that are so clear. For instance, the Cairo Contemporary Dance Center, which is the only institute left in Egypt to study contemporary dance, has been closed last week. And the excuse from the side of the government was no budget, which of course is not the case, as I myself am a graduate of this institute, and I have worked there after my graduation, and we know very well that this is not the story. As 12 years ago, we had received as students death threats, where we had to put metal detectors in front of the gates of the dance studios before we go to take our dance training. Just to go, so this is now the Institut d'Egypte. I mean, now it looks a little bit better, but this was after its destruction. That's basically the kind of damage that we're speaking about. That night, it was the nights when this was happening. Everybody was thinking, what is next when they burn your books? What comes after? And what came after was just violence that did not stop all over the region, really, and state-organized violence, as well as improvised violence by supporters of such regimes. That's when we were collecting the books that night. This is what the situation was like, and these are, as I said, historical artifacts, and we just had to do it ourselves. This is an image that makes me really happy, because these are the volunteers. So people who were volunteering to work on such projects were not the intellectual elite of Egypt. They were really random housewives and people, men and women passing by the street, who just ran thinking, yes, give us gloves and give us an apron and I will come in and start working and filing and drying the books. Even some of them did not even know how to read or write, but they were just helping us with blotting paper to dry the books before dyeing. This is the National Theatre when it was being burnt, right on the square where the headquarters of the firefighters were, and this is Cairo Opera House, 1971, when it was being burnt. Why archive? Because this collection does not exist in any library or institute. And at institutes as inclusive and as massive as the New York Public Library for Performing Arts, there is no collection in contemporary Arab performing arts. Why archive? Because it's going to answer questions that could answer to the white spots, like Thomas said before. Things like how Halim al-Daba, the Egyptian contemporary music composer, ended up working with John Cage, or being the composer of Martha Graham. Answers questions like why the Madri Institute for Archaic Dance was established by an Egyptian in Greece, who is Nelly Mazloum, who is also known as the mother of Demis Roussos, the pop singer, if you are into this kind of music. So Archive wants to try to raise some questions, answer some questions that deal with our memory. It is happening within an urgent moment, and it aims at creating a collection that will be duplicated for 3 different institutions as 3 separate preservation sites. They're all going to be connected by a portal which is open for any partner to use, to have access to the material that is generated. The physical location in Cairo itself is going to also hold collections on dance, theater, and music from the world in general. So we're encouraging other archives and libraries and collectors to, if they have duplicates of materials and they would like to contribute to this site, because by then we are slowly establishing the first resource center for performance and theater studies. All of this is going to be connected by one portal that also allows access to all the institutes. The archive units themselves are also open to public, so anyone at any time could go and visit one of the 3 locations that exist on these 3 continents to consult and access the material that is there. Why on 3 continents? And then I will wrap up so that we could take questions if there is still time. I don't know how far we are on time.
10 minutes left.
10 minutes left, good. Since the Arab revolutions began in December 2010 in Tunisia, and there is a visible rise of interest in curating events that are dealing with contemporary creation, artistic creation from the Arabic-speaking region. But at the same time, the same worry that I have now is the same worry that led me to establishing Haraka in 2006, which is when I was a researcher and trying to find material for one of my texts. I could not access any of the state archives. As I said earlier, you have to have a permission, or you have to be working for the institution or working for the government, and if you do not, then you cannot have access. Therefore, you cannot develop any sense of context of whatever material that you're watching on stage or that you're trying to invite, for instance, to a festival or to write a book about it. But also because, for very obvious reasons, it is important to have several separate preservation sites, given the fact that it is a project happening at such a turbulent moment in history, politically, artistically, and culturally. As we speak today, there are protests and sit-ins that have begun since the new Minister of Culture has arrived in his office and changed all the heads of the National Archives itself, the building that I was just speaking about, Cairo Opera House and other institutions, drastically changing the regulations and the bylaws of these institutions, closing down institutions like the ones I just detailed. Artists are in rights since then. They have suspended their work. Opera Aida, for example, that was actually quite an important piece to the history of Egyptian performing arts when it was commissioned for the opening of the Suez Canal in the 1800s, and has been since then performed at least once a year in Egypt, and it's always a very lavishly produced event. This is the first time that the artists all go on stage in full costumes of Opera Aida and protesting, carrying signs against what we're witnessing now in terms of cultural fascism and extreme measures. Maybe I wrap up here, and we could start taking your questions if you would like to ask us.
I would be curious to know a bit about the ongoing or starting process of institutionalization, because I know that, over the last 2 years, suddenly there was a huge interest and attention to your project from the side of diplomatic institutes, but also from the European Parliament that invited you to present the project, so mostly from the European and American continent, so to say. But how about funding, support, space, all these, the infrastructure? Yes. How is this supposed to happen, or how far are you in developing it?
So over the past, the project was revisited and rewritten really December 2011, right after the moment that we saw on video. Also because right after this, there was a very violent attack from the state security on civic organizations. So any NGOs that are dealing with human rights, cultural productions, artistic work, any civic society foundation or institution, they were attacked and they were closed down. So in downtown Cairo, they practically closed down every single institution that was there, arresting members of them. The foreign people working with them have been deported. So at this point, we could not dream of the project the way we dreamt of it in 2006, but it had to be rewritten. What we thought is urgent to do is to actually secure the physical site in Cairo that would host the archive itself, and that would host the digitization, collection, and archival process and the research meetings. Over the past year and a half, we've been fundraising for this. We have secured the physical site itself in Cairo, and it has hosted its first press conference just one day before arriving here regarding the archive project. End of September, we officially open, and I invite you all to be there when it is opening, because you will be there to see what it is that we've been working on, what kind of material that we've been speaking about. And right after the opening, we will start several activities that are hosted in Trans Dance, the Egyptian International Dance and Performance Festival, which is from the 1st to the 20th of October. So from the beginning of the revision or revisitation until now, what we worked on was securing the space, building a network of funding partners, which of course is still growing as the project grows into creating collections for other institutions in other continents. And at the same time, making sure that it stays safe.
My question is about, so I understood the archive part of your project, and you say that there is also part of for producing next creation or proposals. I'm wondering how we can, if you are interested in this project, in mapping places or document that are there but not yet, they didn't disappear. We know the urgency of like anticipating, and we know that it's not usually, it's not only on public location but also on private location. If you are thinking of mapping it, or at least having a knowledge of what is there in a private collection, or in school, or in mosque, or anything, this element.
Thank you for the question. Yes, we are working with a small group of cultural volunteers. It's a network called the Cultural Innovators Network, and it was established in December last year. And they are basically cultural producers or people working in the fields of political and cultural activism based in several Arab countries. And together with their volunteers, we're trying to do this mapping. But of course, in terms of human resources, the resources are very limited to do a thorough mapping. And since the project, this is actually the first international semi-launch of the idea, basically discussing it in public in a context like this. What we're going to start working on is publicizing the project in a different way so that people could start submitting material, so that we don't always have to go and try to find it, but so that people would be doing this also, because it's important for us that there is a sense of shared ownership of archive, because it is not my project, and it is not Haraka's project. It is a project that has to happen anyway, and it is absolutely necessary that artists and cultural producers and researchers themselves start feeling the urgency to submit the work. And the easiest way is by reaching the project through email, which I'm happy to communicate with anyone.
I just wanted to ask about the neighboring countries. You talked a lot about Egypt right now, so I'm just curious to know if you have any more information about what's going on in Tunisia and Libya and all the other post-revolutionary revolution countries, and where these things are still going on, like in Syria and so on.
Yes, thank you. No, the research, so over the past year, to connect your question to Pirko's question, is that what we've been doing over the past year and a half, more or less, is also scanning generally the region. And as I said, it is taking time, but so far we have collected material from Tunisia by artists such as Amira Shibli, from Syria, choreographers such as Noura Murad and Mais Afan, from Jordan, Ahmad Salhi, from Egypt, Reem Hagab. And while we are collecting this material, we're also encouraging the artists to go and inform their colleagues that this project is happening. Worth mentioning is we're not just collecting the material from these artists. What we do is that we ask every maker, when they are submitting their work to the archive, to sit for 3 interviews. One interview is contextualizing their artistic practices. A second interview is contextualizing and situating their work in the actual moment, historically and politically speaking. And the third is an open question that sometimes deals with their presence on the map of working as a woman in the Arab world, or being an Arab artist during political change.
Male artist.
Male artist, which is one of the main results of the past 3 days, is that we are going to ask men about their maleness in relation to creating contemporary artistic practices. And that's, again, one of the very specific ticks in how the Arabic-speaking region works and understands gender and a hierarchy of power. But yes, indeed, it's not just Egypt and the Levant. It goes all the way to North Africa, and some of the research also happened in the Gulf to see if there is work over there that we could start acquiring.
Thank you very much. I think you're doing an absolutely phenomenally important work. And my question, you've just touched on what I call the archive of the living subject, i.e. the interviewing of people who are performing now. It seems to me that this is really crucial because today's present is tomorrow's history.
Yes.
And so you're recording living people as they are creating and thinking and working now. So that was the question I would have asked. My second question would simply to get some idea of size. I can only ask about Cairo because if you started enumerating every country, you'd go mad in this short space of time. But in Cairo, when we're talking about dancers or dance companies or ballet, you talked about one ballet company or maybe one opera company. How many companies of dance, opera, and theater are you dealing with in Cairo alone?
We have 3 opera houses in Egypt, one in Cairo, one in Alexandria, and one in Damanhur. The most active one is the one in Cairo, given the fact that it is a capital that has over 25 million people living in it. And we have one ballet company that is state-run and state-owned, if one might say so, and one opera company and one contemporary dance company. This is the state-owned and state-run. But as I explained earlier, that the scene is not divided to tradition and contemporary, the scene is really divided to state-run and individually run or civic community, and that is vast. So in terms of artistic creation and production, if we just look at something like music, it is actually one of our biggest exports as industries in Egypt.
I think what might have prompted my question, apart from trying to get a sense of the scope of the massive amount of work you have to do, is also prompted by the sense of the politics of the region.
Yes.
And the difficulties that are being, I mean, the erosion of democracy, all these things that we know from reading newspapers and so on and so forth. But I'm just wondering whether you're beginning to see already a kind of, you've suggested some, but whether these repressive measures that we are at least reading about, how true they are, we don't ever really know, but the repressive measures that we're assuming are happening, certainly in Egypt, are affecting the possibility of these smaller groups surviving and developing.
Indeed, it is. It was a question that was asked by one of the partners who were in discussions with us the past 3 days, Miriam van Imschoot, the dramaturg, where she said, how do you justify the necessity of documentation and building an archive when the region is being challenged? How would the artists react actually in the region when you tell them that we are building an archive instead of telling them we're working on policy, for instance, or we are building a new funding system, for instance? As I explained earlier, the project is called HIVE, so it's this interrupted archive. There is one part that really aims at acquiring and carrying and preserving knowledge or information that has been generated, and the other one is constantly generating projects and processes, whether they're partnerships that include universities or museums or research departments at universities, or they are working in terms of lobbying and policy and campaigning. So over the past weeks, one of the things we were doing was a collaboration with several media bodies in the Middle East on lobbying against the extreme measures that have been taken against the Cairo Opera House.